The mess hall thrummed with the hollow echoes of alien laughter, a sound that carried the metallic tang of contempt. Long tables filled with soldiers from across the Galactic Federation clattered with trays and mugs, the din punctuated by the guttural jokes of warriors who had seen too many victories to imagine defeat. At the center of the revelry stood a towering figure, its scales glinting under the fluorescent strips. The Galactic soldier had the bulk of living stone, his armor plates fused seamlessly with his body. He moved like a predator on stage, throwing smaller recruits against the bulkheads for sport. Each crash of flesh on steel drew fresh laughter from the crowd, the noise swelling like a storm tide. To them, the spectacle was routine, an evening's amusement. To him, it was effortless proof of supremacy. At the far end of the hall sat the human. He did not laugh. He did not flinch. His uniform was plain, no heavy exoskeleton, no shimmering alloys, just olive-drab fabric stretched across a frame hardened by 1,000 unseen battles. The scars on his knuckles were faded, but permanent reminders of fights fought without witnesses. A Special Forces veteran, Green Beret once, though titles meant little this far from Ith, he carried no theatrics in his bearing. Instead, there was silence, coiled like a spring. His eyes followed the room, not the spectacle, absorbing exits, weapons, distances. He had the look of a man who survived not because he was strongest but because he never stopped thinking. The alien giant noticed the human's stillness. Where the others squirmed or laughed along, the man simply sipped from his tin cup, unimpressed. The soldier lumbered forward, massive shadows spilling across the table. The laughter sharpened. The crowd sensed what was coming and leaned in. "You," the alien rumbled, voice thick as gravel. His jaws parted to reveal teeth filed into points. "Meat creature. Tell me, why does your species pretend soldiering? You are fit only for carrying water." The Green Beret raised his eyes, calm as a pundit dawn. He did not answer. He had learned long ago that silence unsettled bullies more than words. The alien's slit-pupiled eyes narrowed. He extended one clawed hand and shoved the human backward on the bench. Metal squealed. The hall erupted in fresh laughter, plates rattling as fists slammed the tables. Still the human said nothing. His jaw flexed, but he remained seated, his body slack as if refusing to grant the moment wait. Mockery was not enough. The Galactic soldier drew back his arm and struck across the human's face. The blow snapped his head sideways, and the crack of it rang against the walls. A few gasps cut through the laughter. Many expected the fragile creature to collapse unconscious. Yet he did not. Slowly, he raised his head again. Blood traced a thin red line from the corner of his lip down to his chin. He wiped it with the back of his hand, inspected the smear, then looked directly into the alien's eyes. His voice was low, nearly drowned by the residual chuckles, but every syllable carried weight. "Don't hit me again." The words hung in the air, like a blade suspended on a hair's breadth. For an instant, silence threatened to swallow the hall. Then, as though a dam burst, the aliens roared with mirth. They clutched their stomachs, stamping their feet, the sound echoing off the bulkheads like rolling thunder. To them, the warning was absurd, the squeak of prey daring the predator. The Galactic soldier laughed hardest of all. His scaled shoulders shook, the sound booming like artillery fire. He leaned closer, his breath hot and foul against the man's skin. "And what will you do, little ape, when I hit you again?" The human did not move. His expression was unreadable, a mask carved from patience and inevitability. He had lived through ambushes in jungles where shadows killed, through desert firefights where comrades bled out in silence, through nights where sleep meant death. He knew that warnings were not bargaining chips. They were contracts. The Federation officers, stationed along the walls, shifted uneasily. They had allowed the alien troops their games. Discipline here was loose, for warriors needed release. Yet this moment bore a different edge. Some recognized the man's composure as something dangerous. Others dismissed it as human stubbornness, irrelevant to the hierarchy of strength. The laughter eventually ebbed into murmurs. Someone in the crowd shouted for a proper challenge. Another voice agreed, calling for the training pit. The idea spread like fire through dry brush. G's turned into chants, names into wages. The Galactic soldier, pride swelling, bared his teeth. Yes, let the Federation see what oath sends to war. The Green Beret finally stood. His movement was deliberate, controlled. He rolled his shoulders once, as though loosening old wounds, then adjusted the sleeves of his uniform. The whole quieted, anticipation hanging heavy. He did not look around or acknowledge the crowd. His gaze remained fixed on the soldier before him, as steady as crosses. "Your choice," he said, voice calm, even measured. "But you won't like where it ends." The alien sneered, mistaking the words for empty bravado. He gestured toward the training pit at the end of the hall, a recessed arena lined with reinforced plating. Soldiers began to surge toward it, eager for spectacle, their boots a stampede on the deck. Bets were placed in hisses and growls. None wagered on the human. The officers hesitated, but curiosity gnawed stronger than caution. They permitted the match. After all, what harm could one human do? The Green Beret walked forward, unhurried, his boots striking the floor with steady rhythm. He neither puffed his chest nor bowed his head. He carried himself as one who had already accepted pain, perhaps even death, but would not be found wanting. Behind him, the laughter reignited, but now it carried an edge, like the tremor before an earthquake. When he stepped into the pit, he looked across the steel expanse at the Galactic soldier waiting for him, scales glinting, confidence radiating like heat. The man flexed his hands once, scarred knuckles whitening, then settled into stillness. He had given his warning. It had been ignored. The room's clamor faded to a hum as the crowd pressed close, eager for the moment when human defiance would be crushed. The air hung thick, alive with expectation, and yet the only thing the Green Beret heard was his own breath, steady and slow. The first exchange was only seconds away. The pit's walls closed in around them, a cage of steel and silence. Floodlights flared above, painting every movement in stark relief. Around the rim, the crowd pressed tight, their voices a low rumble, anticipation bubbling beneath restraint. Wages whispered like wind through leaves, but not a single voice backed the human. All saw inevitability in the massive alien's stride, inevitability in the weight of his armor, inevitability in the way his shadow swallowed the man before him. The Green Beret flexed his fingers once, feeling the old stiffness in his scarred knuckles. He neither crouched nor raised his fists. He simply stood there, loose-limbed, shoulders relaxed, as though nothing in the universe could hurry him. His eyes fixed on the alien's chest, not his snarling face, and he inhaled slowly. Every lesson drilled into him across years of combat whispered in his bones. Never waste movement, never waste breath, never underestimate the enemy, but never overestimate them either. The Galactic soldier bared his teeth and lunged. The floor shook under his mass. He swung a hammer-like fist meant to crush the human skull in a single blow. The sound of air tearing around the strike was louder than the crowd's first roar. The Green Beret turned his head at the last instant, letting the strike glance past his cheek. He dropped low, rolled, and came up behind his opponent, unharmed. Laughter rippled across the rim. To the aliens, it was luck. To the officers watching, the dodge was too precise for chance. They leaned forward, taking note. The giant turned, eyes flashing with irritation. Another swing came, then another. Each blow landed with the force of a pile driver, but each time the man slipped aside, redirecting his body just enough to avoid destruction. His boots scraped across steel, never stumbling, never colliding. He did not fight the storm. He bent like grass under its winds, refusing to break. Finally, he struck back. Not with fists, not with brute force, but with precision. As the alien's arm swung wide, the human stepped in, slammed his palm against the elbow joint, and twisted. A sickening pop echoed, and the Galactic soldier roared, stumbling a step. The crowd gasped. The Green Beret did not linger. He retreated a pace, steady again, eyes never leaving his opponent. The alien's nostrils fled. He flexed the damaged limb, fury replacing arrogance. Trickery, he spat, voice cracking with pain. Cowards fighting. The human said nothing. Words did not win fights. He shifted weight onto the balls of his feet, lowering his center of gravity. His silence was louder than any taunt. The next charge came reckless, full of rage. The alien's fists pummeled the floor, sparks flying as steel bent beneath the blows. One strike grazed the man's shoulder, spinning him half around, pain blooming sharp and hot. He gritted his teeth but did not falter. Pain was an old companion. He used the momentum, flowing with it, twisting back to slam his heel into the alien's knee. The joint buckled, forcing the towering creature onto one leg. The crowd's jeers dimmed, replaced by something uncertain, something close to unease. They had expected comedy, not competition. The Green Beret pressed the advantage. He ducked beneath a desperate swing, wrapped his arms around the alien's waist, and shifted his hips. Using leverage, not strength, he wrenched the heavier body sideways and slammed it into the floor with a thud that rattled teeth in the stands. Shock rippled through the audience. No human should have been able to move such mass. The alien scrambled back to his feet, fury blazing. His scaled chest heaved. He towered above the human still, but the certainty in his stride had wavered. The Green Beret wiped blood from his brow, spat iron onto the floor, and squared up again. The clash resumed, a dance of brutality and calculation. The alien relied on raw power, each strike designed to obliterate. The human relied on training etched into muscle memory, deflections, counters, and surgical strikes to tendons, joints, and soft tissue. One targeted weakness after another compounded, slowing the giant, draining his confidence. Where the alien's strength once seemed boundless, now fatigue crept into his motions. Where laughter once filled the hall, silence began to settle. Minutes stretched. Sweat mingled with blood, pooling on the floor. The alien bellowed in rage and desperation, launching a final, crushing strike, a downward blow meant to end it once and for all. The Green Beret stepped in rather than away, catching the arm at full extension. With a brutal twist and drop of his weight, he tore the joint past its limits. Bones snapped. The alien howled, collapsing to one knee, his arm limp. For the first time since the match began, fear flickered in his predator's eyes. He stared at the human who stood above him, chest rising and falling, bruised but unbroken. The Green Beret leaned close, voice low, steady, carrying only for the defeated soldier to hear. "I warned you." The crowd sat stunned. Their champion, strongest among them, was broken, brought down by a human they had mocked as frail. Officers whispered furiously, some recording every movement for analysis, others narrowing their eyes at the implications. The Green Beret stepped back, releasing his grip. The alien collapsed to the floor, clutching his ruined arm, the fight stripped from him. For a heartbeat, silence reigned in the pit. The man scanned the crowd, expression unreadable. He had proven his point, though none they yet understood the full measure of what they had witnessed. And then the first voice rose, a snarl from another alien soldier unwilling to accept humiliation. He leapt over the railing, crashing into the pit, eyes burning with vengeance. Others stirred, fists clenching, bodies tensing, anger igniting like dry tinder. The Green Beret turned toward the new challenger, rolling his shoulders once more. He did not smile. He did not speak. He only shifted his stance, ready again. The fight, it seemed, was far from finished. The second alien hit the pit floor with a thud, heavier than his rage suggested. He charged blindly, jaws wide, intent on rending the human apart. The Green Beret shifted his stance, calm in the storm, and let the larger creature come. When the alien's bulk collided, the man dropped low, twisted, and redirected the momentum into the steel plating. The impact rattled the walls, leaving the alien dazed. Before the soldier could rise, the man drove a knee into the side of his skull, leaving him sprawled and motionless. The crowd erupted. Some shouted in outrage, others in disbelief, but none with laughter anymore. The humiliation of one warrior could be explained away. Two, defeated in quick succession, forced a new thought into the audience's mind, a thought they resisted with clenched jaws. Perhaps the human was not weak. Perhaps he was something else entirely. Three more vaulted the rail, unwilling to allow pride to die with silence. They circled him, armored bodies gleaming under the lights, eyes blazing with vengeance. The Green Beret turned slowly, watching each one, his breaths deep and steady. His ribs ached from the earlier strike, blood trickled from his brow, but his vision remained clear. He had been outnumbered before, on ridgelines where the jungle pressed close, in alleyways where shadows hid rifles, in deserts where the sun burned the fight out of men. Numbers had never meant safety. They only meant more targets. The first came from the right, claws raised for the throat. The human sidestepped, seized the wrist, and wrenched it until bones snapped. A howl split the air, cut short when the man slammed an elbow into the creature's throat. As that one fell, the second rushed in from behind, but the Green Beret pivoted, ducked under the swing, and used his attacker's momentum to hurl him into the third. Both crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs. He moved before they could rise, driving his boot into one's face, then hammering his fist into the other's temple. In less than a minute, all three were groaning heaps. The pit reeked now of sweat, iron, and fear. Soldiers in the stands shifted uneasily, the certainty of their supremacy bleeding out with every body on the floor. Yet pride is a stubborn thing. When the fourth group leapt into the pit, 5 this time, their voices were a chorus of rage. They came together, coordinated, a swarm determined to overwhelm. The Green Beret's lungs burned, his muscles screamed, but his eyes stayed sharp. He allowed the first blows to come, rolling with impacts, letting armor glance off him. He bled. Yes, but bleeding was nothing new. He fought like a machine stripped of hesitation. One alien he strangled with a belt ripped from his waist. Another he swept off his feet and finished with a joint lock that left the limb useless. The third managed to catch him in the side, the claws tearing fabric and flesh, but the human spun into the pain, driving his knife, pulled from a boot sheath, into the creature's thigh. The alien howled, collapsing, crippled. The fourth and fifth he dispatched with ruthless efficiency, smashing one's head into the steel wall and dragging the other down with a chokehold that ended in unconsciousness. Minutes bled away in violence. His body became an engine of endurance, every motion calculated, every strike aimed at weakness. Where aliens prized brute strength, he exploited anatomy. Where they brawled, he adapted. He did not waste energy on flourish, he fought to end. The officers watched with growing unease. Notes were taken, feeds recorded. The pattern was clear, this was not chance. This was doctrine. Humanity's methods were ugly, efficient, and terrifying. Against all predictions, the man was winning. By the 10th minute, the pit floor was littered with groaning bodies. By the 15th, fresh challengers hesitated before leaping in, glancing at one another, unsure. Pride pushed them, but doubt gnawed. Each time they entered, they were broken, their confidence splintered as surely as their bones. The Green Beret's breath rasped louder now. His knuckles were raw, one eye swollen, ribs screaming with each inhale. Yet he remained upright, moving, striking, surviving. Pain was not defeat, it was proof of life. He had said once, in the silence of his own thoughts, that wars were not won by killing, they were won by refusing to be killed. At the 20th minute, the pit was silent. None stood against him. Bodies lay sprawled in every corner, conscious, unconscious, or writhing in pain. The crowd, once so loud, sat in stunned quiet. The certainty of superiority had crumbled into awe and fear. The Green Beret stood alone in the center, chest heaving, sweat and blood dripping down his frame. His hands trembled, but his eyes did not falter. He looked out at the sea of faces staring down at him, and for a long, heavy moment, no one dared to speak. Then, almost to himself, he muttered, voice hoarse but steady, "I told him not to hit me again." The words were not shouted, not intended for the masses, but they carried all the same. Officers glanced at each other, unsettled. Soldiers shifted, uncertain if they had just witnessed entertainment or the death of an illusion. Above, the floodlights hummed, casting stark shadows across the ruin of bodies. The fight was over, but its consequences had only begun to unfold. The silence clung to the hall like smoke after a fire. Soldiers who had roared themselves hoarse now stared in disbelief, unwilling to accept what they had seen yet unable to deny it. The pit, once an arena of mockery, was littered with the groaning wreckage of their finest. Their champion lay clutching his broken arm, others gasped for breath, and more would not rise for hours. At the center, the human stood as though carved from stone, his breath steadying with each slow inhale. His shirt was torn, his knuckles split, his eye swollen, but his spine was straight. Defiance radiated from him like heat from cooling steel. An officer broke the stillness with a scratch of stylus on datapad. He muttered into a recorder, detailing the event in precise, clip tones. Observation. Subject demonstrates unorthodox yet decisive combat methodology. Casualty rate among superior mass opponents, total. Psychological impact, severe. Others around him whispered, their eyes narrowing. Some glanced at the human with calculation, others with fear. In those moments, he was no longer a curiosity. He was a variable they had not accounted for. The galactic soldier who had begun it all tried to rise, staggering on unsteady legs. His pride demanded he stand, demanded he erase the humiliation. But when his gaze met the green berets, the weight of memory pinned him down. He collapsed again, clutching his arm, shame heavier than pain. The human did not taunt him. He simply turned away, the matter settled in his eyes. Victory required no gloating. As the crowd dispersed, whispers traveled faster than footsteps. They spread through the ship, carried from bunk to corridor, from mess hall to hangar bay. The words shifted with each retelling. One man fought 20. A human crushed the Federation's elite. Earth breeds demons in human skin. The details blurred, but the heart of the story grew sharper with every tongue. By dawn, the entire vessel would know. Within days, the fleet. Within weeks, the Federation itself. Later, in the quiet of a washroom, the Green Beret stood alone before a cracked mirror. He dabbed a rag against his swollen cheek, watching the blood swell pink into the water. The pain was nothing new. Pain was a language he had long mastered. His reflection met his stare, worn eyes beneath a scarred brow, and he thought of jungles where leeches clung, deserts where heat killed as surely as bullets, mountains where snow buried men alive. He thought of brothers lost, of promises buried in the dirt. The galaxy believed it had seen the measure of humanity, but it had only glimpsed one man carrying ghosts of countless battles. Behind closed doors, Federation commanders debated. Some argued humans were too dangerous, too unpredictable, their violence uncontrollable. Others insisted such resilience was precisely what the galaxy needed, as was brewed on the fringes. They weighed strategy against fear, alliance against containment. No consensus formed, only the acknowledgement that Earth could no longer be dismissed. The Green Beret returned to the training deck days later, alone. He worked in silence, moving through drills with a knife, a length of rope, his own body weight. No audience watched him now, no crowd jeered or cheered. But from the shadows, eyes lingered. Soldiers who had once sneered now studied, mimicking the rhythm of his movement. Some tried to mimic, failing awkwardly. Others simply stared, unsettled by how methodical brutality could look so calm. In the barracks, conversations changed. Where once they spoke of humans as fragile, now they spoke of them as dangerous. Some used the word with admiration, others with fear. The laughter that once followed the name human had vanished. It was replaced by a silence that weighed more heavily than mockery ever had. Yet the Green Beret did not revel in reputation. He carried it like another rucksack, heavy and unwelcome but necessary. He had not fought to prove himself, not to win wages or silence mockery. He had fought because a line had been crossed, because a promise had been broken. A man struck him once. He had said not to do it again. They had not listened. What followed was inevitable. One evening, as he sharpened his knife in solitude, a young alien recruit approached hesitantly. Unlike the others, this one did not snay. His voice trembled. "How did you do it? How did you fight them all?" The Green Beret looked up, blade gleaming under dim light. He considered the question, then set the knife down. His reply was quiet, but it carried the weight of truth. "I didn't fight them all. I fought one at a time, and I never stopped." The recruit nodded slowly, absorbing the words, then retreated. In time, those words too would spread, carried like contraband wisdom through the ranks. When the next conflict came, and the Federation sent soldiers to the edge of known space, whispers followed the deployments. In every barracks, in every mess hall, in every pit where pride and strength clashed, someone repeated the story of the human who stood alone. Some spoke it with awe, others with dread, but all agreed on one thing: the galaxy would not soon forget. The Green Beret cleaned his knife, slid it back into its sheath, and rose. He moved like a man preparing for the next fight, though none had yet been named. The ship's engines rumbled beneath his feet, carrying them toward another war on another world. He felt no triumph, no joy, only readiness. He had told them not to hit him again. They had laughed. Now they would carry the memory of silence, The silence that followed when 20 warriors fell, and one man still stood. The galaxy would decide what to make of that silence. He already knew. It was only the beginning. The warship drifted through the void, its engines humming with the steady rhythm of inevitability. Stars stretched like frozen fire across the viewport, 1,000 silent witnesses to the tension building within the vessel's steel heart. The incident in the pit had become legend in Maydays, retold until the details blurred into myth. Some said he fought for an hour, others swore he never bled, but all agreed on the ending. None stood against him. What began as a spectacle now gnawed at the Federation's order, cracking the foundation of its hierarchy. The Green Beret walked the corridors like a shadow, silent and solitary. He was no longer mocked openly. Soldiers who once jeered now shifted aside, unwilling to meet his gaze. Respect had replaced ridicule, though it was laced with unease. He had not asked for either. His purpose remained the same: survive, observe, and return home when duty allowed. Yet he could feel eyes on his back at every turn, as though the ship itself had begun to watch him. It was not the soldiers he worried about. It was the officers. Command rooms whispered with debates no one dared to voice publicly. Was this man a weapon to wield, or a threat to contain? He represented Earth, but his actions had eclipsed diplomacy. The Federation valued power, and he had shown them power in its rawest form. That alone made him dangerous. One evening, he was summoned to the briefing chamber. The room was cold, lined with screens flickering tactical maps of contested star systems. Around the table sat beings of rank, scaled, feathered, armored in ceremonial plates. Their eyes glinted like polished stone, assessing him as though he were a specimen under glass. "You are human," one began, voice sharp with disdain disguised as formality. "Your species joined this federation under the premise of cooperation, not domination. Yet your display in the pit suggests otherwise." The Green Beret stood at ease, hands behind his back, posture unmoving. "I didn't ask for that fight. I finished it." Another officer leaned forward, mandibles clicking. "You finished 20 of our best. Do you know what that means?" "Yes," he said, his tone even, his words clipped. "It means you underestimated the wrong species." A ripple of unease passed through the chamber. Some scowled, others narrowed their eyes. Yet one among them, an older officer with a face carved in ridges, let out a low, grudging chuckle. "He speaks like a soldier," the elder muttered. "Not a diplomat. Perhaps that is what we need." The debate fled, voices clashing like blades. Some demanded the human be restricted, studied, controlled. Others argued he should be deployed, unleashed where Federation troops faltered. The Green Beret remained silent, listening, his expression unreadable. He had learned long ago that words were often less effective than silence. Silence forced others to fill it, and in their filling, truth revealed itself. Finally, the elder officer turned to him directly. "War brews at the edge of the Orion Spur. The Kagathi Empire expands, and our forces struggle against their shock troops. We require adaptability. We require soldiers who do not break. Tell me, human, will your kind fight when the stars burn?" The Green Beret met the officer's gaze without flinching. "We've been fighting since we learned to stand upright. The stars don't change that." The room fell quiet. Even those who bristled at his presence could not deny the conviction in his tone. After the meeting, as the officers dispersed, 2 soldiers approached him in the corridor. Both were aliens who had once mocked him in the mess hall. Now their postures were deferential, their voices tentative. "Teach us," one said, his scaled brow furrowed. "What you did, it wasn't strength. It was something else. Show us." The Green Beret studied them for a long moment. He saw not mockery but genuine curiosity, maybe even respect. He nodded once. "Meet me at the training deck at dawn." The next morning, more than 2 arrived. A dozen soldiers of different species gathered in silence, waiting for him. Their armor gleamed, their weapons sharp, but their eyes betrayed uncertainty. He began with nothing but their bodies. "Strength is wasted if it doesn't land," he told them, his voice cutting through the hum of the ship. "You rely on size, on armor, on tradition. That's why you fall. War isn't about tradition. It's about adaptation. It's about ending the fight before it ends you. He drilled them in holds, in leverage, in the brutal simplicity of strikes aimed not at pride but at survival. They struggled, stumbled, cursed in their own tongues, but he corrected them with patience forged in years of teaching rookies back home. Some resented his methods. Others embraced them. All left with a new understanding. Humanity fought not with strength alone, but with a relentless refusal to yield. As days passed, more came. The training deck filled each morning, the sound of bodies striking mats echoing through the halls. The story shifted again. Now he was not only the human who fought 20, he was the human who taught others how to stand when standing seemed impossible. Yet not all welcomed this change. Whispers of fear grew louder in the officer ranks. If one human could humble their warriors, what would happen if Oath sent more? Could humanity become a rival, not an ally? Control slipped from their fingers with each soldier who trained under him. One night, as he returned to his quarters, he found his door sealed, guards stationed outside. An officer stepped forward, voice cold. "You are confined until further notice. Orders from above." He met their eyes, calm but unyielding. He had been caged before, in prisons of bamboo and concrete, and each time he had found a way out. Confinement was not defeat, it was only delay. Inside the room, he sat on the bunk, the hum of the ship vibrating beneath him. He sharpened his knife slowly, steel whispering against stone. He thought of the recruits he had begun to shape, of the officers' fear, of the coming wars beyond the stars. The Federation believed they had contained him, but in truth, they had only confirmed what he already knew. They feared humanity not because it was weak, but because it endured. And endurance, he knew, was the most dangerous weapon of all. The stars outside shifted as the warship changed course, engines flaring brighter. Somewhere ahead lay battle, and with it, the choice that would define not just his fate, but Earth's place among the stars. He slid the knife back into its sheath and leaned against the wall, eyes closing for the briefest moment of rest. The fight in the pit had ended. The war beyond it was only beginning. The battlefield smelled of metal and ozone, the acrid tang of plasma scorching the air. The Federation line had broken, retreating under the relentless press of Kagathi soldiers, their towering forms clad in jagged armor that seemed born from the bones of ancient beasts. Explosions punctuated the chaos, carving fire across the darkened sky. Amid the collapse, the Green Beret stood firm, rifle cradled in his hands, movements precise and deliberate. Where others stumbled back, he moved forward, drawing fire and cutting down enemies with an efficiency that bordered on eerie. He had not asked for command, yet in the crucible of defeat, soldiers turned to him. Aliens who once sneered now followed his gestures, mimicking his economy of motion, his brutal pragmatism. He had taught them in sterile training halls, but here, in the ruin and blood, they understood what those lessons meant. Every strike was survival. Every step forward defied inevitability. They were no longer simply Federation soldiers. They were fighters who had glimpsed humanity's stubborn refusal to break. The central conflict had taken shape long before this battle, though none had admitted it aloud. The Federation prided itself on unity, yet it had been fractured by complacency. Species relied on bulk, on numbers, on ancient doctrine. Humanity, with its fragile flesh and unremarkable presence, had been dismissed as little more than a curiosity. But the pit fight had revealed a truth that now screamed across the battlefield. The smallest soldier, unarmored and outnumbered, could bring giants to their knees. That truth was the Federation's salvation, or its undoing. Amid the firestorm, a Kagathi warrior charged, towering over the Green Beret, its blade shimmering with energy. It laughed as it swung, the guttural sound carrying the same arrogance the Federation once held. The Green Beret slipped inside the arc of the strike, driving his knife into the joint where armor met flesh. The giant collapsed, shrieking, but the human had already moved on. There was no pause, no victory cry. For him, battle was never about glory. It was about the next fight, the next breath. Behind him, soldiers rallied. They mimicked his rhythm, fighting in smaller, sharper movements, abandoning the Federation's cumbersome formations. Where the line had once collapsed, it now bent and shifted like a living thing, striking where the enemy least expected. For every soldier who fell, two more pressed forward, driven less by orders than by the unyielding example of the man at their center. Yet command saw something else. From the safety of orbit, officers watched feeds of the ground war and whispered in tones heavy with suspicion. If one human could galvanize troops across species, what would happen when Earth sent more? Could humanity reshape the very structure of the Federation? Fear coiled around them like a tightening rope. What they had once considered an anomaly now threatened their control. The Green Beret had no time for their fears. His world had always been the dirt under his boots, the immediate threat before him. Still, he could feel the weight of their eyes, the invisible chains they tried to wrap around him even as he fought for their survival. He knew enough of politics to sense the choice looming on the horizon, to be their weapon or their scapegoat. When the Kagathi pressed their assault with reinforcements, he adapted again. He led a strike team through the ruins, cutting off enemy supply lines, dismantling their advance one fire team at a time. His soldiers, once Federation's pride, now something new, moved with him, not as units bound by orders, but as hunters who trusted their instincts. Each victory was small, but together they carved breathing space into what had been certain annihilation. At dusk, as the battlefield dimmed under the smoke of burning wreckage, he stood atop a shattered ridge. His uniform was scorched, his face streaked with blood not all his own. Around him, exhausted soldiers raised their weapons in ragged triumph. They had held the line. They had survived where survival seemed impossible. And at their center was the human who had once been mocked, who had once stood alone in a pit, telling giants not to hit him again. He looked out over the field, seeing the bodies of enemies and allies alike, and felt the hollow weight of victory. Survival was never clean. He knew the officers would twist this moment into something it wasn't. They would call it strategy, claim it was Federation resolve. They would not admit that it had been desperation transformed into defiance, carried on the shoulders of those who had learned a new way to fight. Night fell, and with it came silence broken only by the crackle of fires. He walked among the wounded, binding wounds with hands steadier than his thoughts. Soldiers reached for him, not as commander, not as alien, but as brother. They whispered thanks in languages he didn't understand, but the tone was universal. Respect. Trust. In those quiet moments, he recognized the central conflict had grown beyond him. This was no longer about one man in a pit, or even humanity proving its worth. It was about the future of the Federation itself. Would it cling to tradition and hierarchy, or would it embrace the adaptability that had saved it here? His existence had forced that choice, and he knew those in power would not forgive him for it. As dawn crept across the horizon, he sat on a broken wall, rifle resting across his knees. He had survived another battle, but survival was only the beginning. The war stretched far beyond this world, and with it came decisions he could not escape. The Federation feared him, the soldiers revered him, and the enemy mocked him. In the space between those truths lay the path forward. He exhaled slowly, watching the sky shift from ash to pale light. The stars beyond were calling, each one a battlefield waiting to test the same question. Could humanity endure against empires that had forgotten what it meant to struggle? He already knew the answer. The war was not over. It had only just begun.